It is somewhere around the year 62. A man in his mid-50s sits in a rented room in Rome under military guard. There's a chain on his right wrist. The other end of that chain is locked to the left wrist of a Roman soldier, a member of the emperor's own elite guard. The prisoner has lived like this for 2 years, waiting to hear whether Nero's court will set him free or take his head. The man is Paul of Tarsus, and he is dictating a letter to a small church 700 miles to the east in a Roman colony called Philippi. The letter is short, but buried near the end of it is one sentence so bold, so almost outrageous, that people have been clinging to it for 2,000 years. Be anxious for nothing. Stop and feel the audacity of that. A man chained to a soldier, waiting on a verdict that could end his life, tells a struggling little congregation and tells you, do not be anxious about anything. Not some things, not the small things, anything. And then, in the very next breath, Paul reaches for a word that seems to have no business in a sentence about prayer. It is not a temple word. It is not a synagogue word. It is a soldier's word. A word from the streets of a garrison town. A word Paul may have chosen while staring at the chain on his own wrist. Most English Bibles translate it so softly that you have probably slid right past it your entire life. We are going to get to that word. And when we do, I promise it will change the way you fall asleep at night. But not yet. Because first, you need to know what this verse is not. This is not a verse about positive thinking. This is not a verse about pretending everything is fine. This is not God telling you that your problems are too small to bother him with. This is a verse about a transfer, about taking the heaviest thing you are carrying and physically handing it to someone whose hands are stronger than yours. And the man who wrote it composed it in chains, in the middle of a church fight under the shadow of a death sentence. Grab your Bible, open it to Philippians chapter 4, and let's look at this together. The phrase your English Bible renders as be anxious is a single Greek word, Merimnao. Say it slowly, Merimnao. And many scholars trace it back to an older root, merizo, which means to divide, to pull apart, to split into pieces. Sit with that, because it may be the most honest definition of anxiety ever written. Anxiety, in the language of the New Testament, is not simply fear. It is a divided mind. It is being pulled in 2 directions at once. Part of you here in this room, at this table, with these people, and part of you somewhere in tomorrow, walking through a disaster that has not happened yet. Anyone who has ever sat at a family dinner while mentally rehearsing a doctor's appointment knows exactly what Merimnao feels like. Your body is present. Your mind is torn in half. Jesus used this exact word on a hillside in Galilee. Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink. Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Same word, Merimnao. And he used it again in a crowded house in Bethany to a woman named Martha, who was banging pans in the kitchen while her sister sat still. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. Martha was standing a few feet away from the Son of God, and her mind was somewhere else entirely. That is what this word does. It can put you in the same room as Jesus and make sure you never actually meet him there. Here's what most people miss about Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. Paul was not writing it to strangers. He was writing it to a town where he had already lived this verse, in their own jail. Roll the clock back about 10 years to the day Paul first walked into Philippi. The first person to believe his message in that city, the first recorded Christian convert on the continent of Europe, was not a philosopher or a priest. She was a businesswoman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, a woman of means who met Paul at a riverbank prayer meeting and then opened her home to his entire team. Church history in Europe begins in Lydia's living room, but Philippi turned on Paul fast. He cast a spirit of fortune-telling out of an enslaved girl, and the men who had been selling her predictions watched their income vanish. They dragged Paul and his co-worker Silas into the marketplace, where the magistrates had them stripped and beaten with wooden rods, a Roman punishment on bare skin in public, then thrown into the inner cell of the city prison with their feet clamped in stocks. Now be honest with yourself. That night, bleeding, humiliated, locked in the dark in a strange city, what would your mind have been doing? Because we know what Paul's was doing. Luke records it in the 16th chapter of Acts, and it is one of the strangest sentences in the whole book. At midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Singing. At midnight, with open wounds. Then the earthquake hit. The doors flew open, the chains came loose, and the jailer, a man whose life was forfeit under Roman law if his prisoners escaped, drew his sword to kill himself. And out of the darkness Paul shouted, "Do yourself no harm, we are all here." That hardened Roman jailer fell down trembling and asked the question every human being eventually asks someone, "What must I do to be saved?" Before the sun rose, he had washed their wounds with his own hands, been baptized with his whole household, and set a table for the men he had locked up hours earlier. Now, think about who was sitting in the congregation at Philippi when this letter arrived, roughly 10 years later, and was read out loud. Lydia, perhaps, older now, and quite possibly a middle-aged jailer who once held a sword to his own throat at midnight. When those people heard the words, "Be anxious for nothing," they did not hear a theory. They heard the voice of the man who sang in their prison. Paul had practiced this verse in Philippi before he ever preached it to Philippi. If you are seeing this verse in a way you never have before, do me one small favor before we go deeper. Take 2 seconds and subscribe and tap the bell, because we walk slowly through one passage like this every week, and I do not want you to miss the next one. And if someone you love has been lying awake at night lately, send them this video when it ends. It might be the most pastoral thing you do all week. Now. But it gets stranger, because there is a problem with Paul, and we need to face it head on. In his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul lists everything he has survived: beatings, shipwrecks, a night and a day adrift in the open sea, hunger, cold, danger from robbers, danger from his own countrymen. And then he says this: "And apart from these things, there is the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches." Look at the word he uses there. Merimnao, the same root, the same word. The man who wrote "Be anxious for nothing" tells another church in writing that he feels the weight of Merimnao every single day. So is Paul a hypocrite? Or does he know something about this command that we keep missing? Hold that question, and look at one more clue, hiding in this very letter to Philippi. In chapter 2, Paul praises his young protege Timothy with these words, "I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare." The verb there is merimnao. The exact word he forbids in chapter 4, verse 6, he uses as a compliment in chapter 2. Same letter, same pen. Here's what that tells you. The feeling itself was never the sin. Care, when it stays connected to God, is called love. Care, when it curdles inward, when you pull the weight onto your own shoulders and carry it alone in silence at night, becomes the thing that tears your mind in two. The problem was never that you care about your family, your health, your money, your country. The problem is what you do with the weight. And that distinction changes everything, because it means this verse is not scolding you for having a heart. It is showing you where to put what your heart picks up. And Paul knew that weight personally in the very season he wrote this letter. The Philippians had sent him a financial gift, carried 700 miles by a man named Epaphroditus. Somewhere along the way, or after arriving in Rome, Epaphroditus got sick, not a cold. Paul says he was ill, near to death. Picture Paul chained in that room, watching the friend who came to help him slip toward the grave, unable to do a single thing about it. And listen to how Paul describes his own heart when God spared that man's life. God had mercy on him, and not only on him but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow, sorrow upon sorrow, grief stacked on grief. Paul admits, inside this very letter, that he stood one funeral away from something breaking in him. The Bible is not asking you to become a person without feelings. It keeps showing you people who felt everything, and then it shows you where they put it. Which brings us to the fight, because you should know what sits 4 verses before, "Be anxious for nothing." Chapter 4, verse 2. I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. 2 women, real names. Co-workers, Paul says, fought at his side for the gospel, women whose names are written in the book of life. And they were locked in a conflict so serious that news of it traveled across the sea to a prison cell in Rome. Paul had to beg a friend in writing to step between them. So understand what kind of document you are holding. Be anxious for nothing was not composed on a quiet retreat. It was written into the middle of a church fight by a chained man grieving a nearly dead friend to a congregation whose two most respected women were not speaking to each other. This verse was born with the noise of real life all around it. Whatever is loud in your life right now, it qualifies. Now watch what happens next. Because Paul does not simply say stop worrying. Anyone can say that, and it has never once worked. Saying stop worrying to an anxious person is like saying stop drowning to a man in the water. Instead, Paul replaces the carrying with a handover, and he names the exact moves. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God. 4 moves. Look at them one at a time, because each Greek word does a different job. The first is phroureo, prayer. In the New Testament, this is the broad word, the word for turning your face toward God at all. Before you ask for anything, you change the direction you are looking. Anxiety always stares at the problem. Prayer turns the chair around. That alone begins to undivide a divided mind, because you cannot look in 2 directions at once. The second is diesis, supplication. This one is specific. It is the beggar's word, the word for a concrete request from someone who knows he cannot supply his own need. Not vague spiritual sentiment, particulars, the biopsy on Thursday, the sun in Denver, the number in the account. God does not grade your requests by size or dignity. Paul says in everything. The Greek is sweeping. In every single thing, there is no category of your life stamped too small for heaven. The third move is the strange one, and here's the part nobody tells you. With thanksgiving, Eucharist, gratitude offered before the answer comes. Think about how odd that is. Paul does not say make your requests, and once God comes through, remember to say thank you. He puts the thanksgiving inside the request in advance, while the problem is still standing there, unsolved. Why? Because thanksgiving is memory doing its job. It is your soul reciting the last 10 times God carried you while you hand him the 11th. An anxious mind says, what if he does not come through this time? A thankful mind answers, I have a list of times he did. You cannot ruminate and give thanks in the same moment. The two cannot occupy the same mind. Thanksgiving is not the decoration on the prayer. It is the part that breaks the spiral. And the fourth move is the transfer itself. Let your requests be made known to God. The verb is norizo, to make known, to disclose, to lay out plainly, not hint at, not carry quietly while telling everyone at church you are fine. Itemize it. Say it out loud, one thing at a time, and put each item into his hands like a man handing over an invoice he cannot pay. This is the handover the whole verse has been building toward. The command was, never feel nothing. The command is carry nothing alone. Hand it over and leave it in the hands you handed it to. Which brings us, at last, to the word I promised you at the beginning. Because verse 6 is a command, but verse 7 is a promise. And the promise contains the soldier's word. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus. Will guard. In Greek, phroureo, and this is not a poetic word, it is a military word. It is the word for a garrison, for sentries posted on a wall, for armed men standing watch over a city through the night, so that the people inside can sleep. Now, why would Paul reach for a word like that? Look at who he was writing to. Philippi was not an ordinary town. Almost a century earlier, the plains outside that city hosted one of the most consequential battles in Roman history. Mark Antony and Octavian against Brutus and Cassius, the assassins of Julius Caesar. The Roman historian Appian describes that clash in his account of the civil wars. The battle that decided who would rule the Roman world fought at Philippi's doorstep. And when it ended, the victors settled their discharged veteran soldiers right there, on that ground. Philippi became a Roman colony, a little Rome transplanted into Macedonia, full of retired legionaries and their descendants, with Roman law, Roman citizenship, and sentries who walked its walls at night. Every man and woman in that congregation had grown up walking past guards. They had fallen asleep their whole lives inside a watched city. Nobody in Philippi lay awake wondering whether someone was on the wall. Of course, someone was on the wall. That was the whole point of the wall. So when Paul says, "The peace of God will phroureo your hearts and your minds," every listener in that room saw it instantly. Peace, standing sentry. Peace, walking the perimeter of your mind through the night watch. Peace, armed and posted at the one gate anxiety always comes through. And now remember where Paul is sitting as he dictates that word, chained to a soldier of the imperial guard. He tells us so himself in the first chapter of this very letter. It has become known throughout the whole imperial guard that my imprisonment is for Christ. For 2 years, around the clock, Paul has had an armed Roman sentry physically attached to his body. And somewhere in that room, choosing the word for what God's peace does to a human heart, Paul may well have glanced at the man on the other end of his chain. "You think this soldier guards me? I know a better sentry. Notice something else, and do not rush past it." Paul does not say you will guard the peace of God. He says the peace of God will guard you. You are not the sentry in this verse. You are the city. The guarding is not your job. Your job was verses 6, the handover. The watching is his. And this peace, Paul says, surpasses all understanding. The Greek word is hupereko, to rise above, to outrank. This is peace that outranks your logic. Peace that shows up before the problem is solved. Sometimes, while the problem is getting worse. Peace your accountant cannot explain and your cardiologist cannot argue with. Peace that makes no sense on paper, standing its post anyway. Stay with me now, because this promise has a paper trail, and it runs straight through the same little church. About 50 years after Paul's letter, the church at Philippi received another one. It came from an old man named Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, who had been personally taught by the Apostle John. His letter to the Philippians still survives, one of the earliest Christian documents we possess outside the New Testament, and in it he points them back to the blessed Paul, who wrote you letters. The church that first heard "be anxious for nothing" was still standing, still being pointed to this teaching, a half-century later. But it is Polycarp's ending that shows you what a guarded heart actually looks like. Decades after that letter, Roman authorities arrested him. He was 86 years old. They led him into a stadium full of hostile spectators, and the proconsul offered him the standard exit: curse Christ, swear by Caesar, and walk free. The account of that day, recorded by eyewitnesses from his own church, preserves the old man's answer. 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? No panic, no bargaining. An old man standing in the calmest place in that entire stadium, inside the garrison. That is phroureo. Not the absence of danger, the presence of a guard. Now let me carry this from a Roman stadium into your house, because you know the hour I am about to name. It is 3 o'clock in the morning. The house is dark and silent, and your eyes are open. Your body is exhausted, but your mind has already left the bed and started walking the wall. The adult child who has stopped calling. The test result that comes back Thursday. The retirement number that is not what it was supposed to be by now. The parent who is fading a little more each month. The marriage that has gone quiet in a way you cannot name. You lie perfectly still, and your mind walks the perimeter, checking every gate over and over, as if your vigilance at 3 in the morning is the only thing holding your world together. Can I tell you what you have been doing? You have been pulling guard duty. Some of you have been pulling it for decades. You took a post nobody assigned you. On a wall you were never meant to stand, and you have grown so used to the weight of the watch that you call it normal. You even call it love, and no one has ever relieved you, because you have never once let them. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 is your relief order. So the next time you find yourself awake on that wall at 3 in the morning, try the 4 moves, literally, right there on your pillow. Turn the chair around. Father, I am looking at you now, not at Thursday. Then thank him first, out loud if you have to, in a whisper. For 3 specific times he has already carried you by name, because your history with God is the best argument against your fear. Then hand the items over one at a time, like invoices you cannot pay. My son, the scan, the money. Mom, Each one named, each one transferred, made known. And then the strangest thing will begin to happen, not always instantly, but far more often than you would believe. The problems will still be there in the morning. Thursday will still come. But somewhere between amen and sunrise, the watch changes. Someone else takes the wall. And you sleep. Not because the danger is gone, but because you finally believe someone stronger than you is awake. This is not a story about a Bible verse. This is not a story about an ancient prison. This is not a story about learning to relax. This is the story of a God who looked at his exhausted, torn-in-half children, pacing the night watch, and posted his own peace at the gate, and who has been trying for 2,000 years to get you to come down off the wall. So let me hand you 3 things to carry out of this video, and the last one is the one I hope you fall asleep holding tonight. First, the facts. The word is Merimnao, a mind divided, a heart pulled into pieces. The command in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 is not feel nothing, because the same letter shows Paul praising holy concern and confessing his own sorrow upon sorrow. The command is carry nothing alone. It is a transfer, not a suppression. And it was written by a man in chains, mid-church fight, under a death sentence, so it already knows what your week looks like. Second, the practice. Thanksgiving is the hinge the whole verse turns on. Gratitude offered in advance before the answer is what breaks the spiral, because a mind reciting what God has already done cannot simultaneously rehearse what might go wrong. Do not wait until you feel peaceful to give thanks. Give thanks and watch the peace get posted. And third, this is the one. You were never assigned to that wall. Read verse 7 as slowly as you need to. It does not say you will guard the peace of God. It says the peace of God will guard you. You are not the sentry. You are the city, the one being watched over, the one being kept. The sentry God posted does not blink, does not tire, and does not sleep, which means, at long last, you can. So here is my question for you tonight, and I genuinely read these. What is the one thing you keep taking back after you have handed it over? The burden you give to God at church on Sunday and quietly pick up again by Tuesday? Name it in the comments below. Sometimes writing it down is the first real handover you ever make. And if this video met you where you are, share it with one person who has been walking the wall at night, and subscribe so we can open the next passage together. Until next time, keep studying the Word. Keep handing over what was never yours to carry, and come down off the wall. The watch is His. God bless you.